Gentlemen, I hope you hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Callist. Good morning.
Morning. Yes, I suggest that we start. I think we have a reasonable number so that we can save time. The other colleagues will join us as we progress. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of the Water Resources Institute of the Ministry of Water and Environment to welcome you to our 22nd monthly webinar. These are a series of webinars that are meant to give us an opportunity to share experiences on the work we are doing so that we can learn from each other, but also we use it as an opportunity to get a feedback from a wide range of stakeholders. Again, for those of you attending for the first time, we hold these webinars on the last Friday of every month from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we would want to appeal to you, those of you who are interested in sharing the work you are doing, and indeed, I would want to encourage all of us to share so that we can inform the others who may not know what we are doing, but also get to hear from them on the work we are doing. So if you are interested in making a presentation in one of the monthly webinars, I want to request you to send information the Water Resources Institute Secretariat. The emails are there. Normally when we send out these invitations, the emails are there. You will be scheduled on one of the monthly webinars so that you can share. And I want to encourage you to take advantage of this. But also we want to make sure that you have a wide range of topics being shared so that we can know what is being done here in the country, but also outside the country. For this webinar, we are going to listen to an interesting topic presentation on thinking with the landscape. Here is Gulleys quicker, a case for Lwakhakha sub-catchment. And we are going to hear from an expert from Aid Environment. Later on, I will request Mr. James Kiseka to introduce the speaker and also make some remarks on behalf of the Aid Environment. Otherwise, I'm called Dr. Callist Ndimugaya. I'm the Acting Director for Water Resources Management, and I also oversee the Water Resources Institute. And on behalf of the coordinator, the beauty coordinator, and the team at the Water Resources Institute, I want to thank you for sparing time to be with us here. I welcome you, and now I want to hand over to Mr. James Kiseka to give us some remarks on behalf of the environment, introduce the speaker, and later moderate the webinar. And the Water Resources Institute team will come in at the end to close this webinar. Thank you very much and wish you an interesting webinar. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Dr. Callist. Good morning, partners, colleagues, and friends. Thank you for taking the time to join this webinar about gully treatment from a landscape approach. My name is James Williams Kiseka. I serve at Aid Environment as the East Africa Office Director. For those of you who may not know Aid Environment, we are an international non-for-profit organization that protects and restores the natural environment for social and economic good. In Uganda, we have our main office in Bugolobi, Kampala, and field offices in Kapchora and in Gulu. The office in Kapchora is our Elgon field office, while the office in Gulu is our Upper Nile field office. In Uganda, for those of you who may not be aware, we develop strategies and plans for integrated water resources management at different levels. For instance, we are part of the team that has developed 2 catchment management plans so far in the country, one for Lwakhakha, the other for Lwakhakha. In addition, we've developed 3 sub-catchment management plans and 3 micro-catchment management plans. But in addition to that, Aid Environment is part of the team who developed the current strategy for implementing catchment-based water resources management in Uganda. In addition to that, we implement projects on ground in various regions of the country and on different contexts. Especially, we implement projects on water catchment management, water source protection, wetland restoration, agriculture development, to mention but a few. We work a lot with smallholder farmers. Additionally, we evaluate projects and programs on behalf of donors or implementers. Think of mid-term evaluations or end-term evaluations. Think of gender assessments or child labor assessments or living income or minimum wage studies, but also think of feasibility studies regarding carbon financed projects. So that is some of the work that we do. For today, in a few moments, my colleague Evelyn Wisenje will present to you insights from a World Bank supported project, which we are implementing in Lwakhakha sub-catchment on behalf of the Ministry of Water and Environment. As Aid Environment, we are grateful to the ministry for trusting us to implement this project. And also we are grateful to our supervisor, IUCN, for walking this journey with us. The presenter for today, Evelyn Wisenje, is an expert in IWRM. She's a professional with more than a dozen years of experience. At Aid Environment, she leads our IWRM thematic group, but also she is the head of partnerships at our office. I invite you to write your questions and comments in the chat box. You can find that icon while Evelyn is presenting. Please write your questions and comments. We will respond to those after the presentation. So ladies and gentlemen, I look very much forward to having you actively participate in this webinar this morning and for you to share your insights and experiences. Evelyn, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, James, for ably introducing me. Good morning, everyone. So let me do. I hope I'm able to share my presentation. Unfortunately, I think I'm still disabled. I cannot present my work. How do we do it?
Shall I invite Francis and colleagues from the ministry, IT team, kindly support?
Okay. Yeah, so in the meantime, as probably Francis is working on that, I could go ahead to give just a brief regarding the project so that by the time he fixes it, then we go straight to the actual gist of the matter. Yeah, so what I'll be presenting this morning to you all is insights of what we've been doing under the project that James has already introduced. It was a consultancy, it's a consultancy where Aid Environment is supporting communities to implement priority catchment management measures in Lwakhakha sub-catchment. So we are implementing the project on behalf of Ministry of Water and Environment with funds from World Bank and being supervised by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. But also important to note for this project is that it is community driven. So we were all doing all this, engaging communities at every step of our work. I'll request Francis to let us know just in case I'm able to share my work. Yeah, so maybe something to mention still is that it is a 2-year project. We started it in 2022, around February, and we should be concluding business this year in November. Lwakhakha sub-catchment is located in Mpologoma catchment, which is a part of the Choga water management zone. And it is transboundary in nature, shared between Uganda and Kenya. But for the interest of this presentation today, we will mainly drill on the work we have done on the Ugandan side. So it's a big sub-catchment. It's a total of about 586 square kilometers. And the part that is within Uganda is over 50%, around 329 square kilometers. It covers about 5 districts. That is Namisindwa, Bududa, Tororo, Manafwa, and Kwen. But looking at the kind of interventions we are doing and really wanting to do impactful work, we mainly drilled on 3 districts, that is Namisindwa, Tororo, and Manafwa. And of course, for reasons that were obvious, because during the assessment, we realized that is where most of the issues are happening in those 3 districts and needed immediate attention. I'm not sure if Francis has already.
Shall I stop you right there for a moment just to check
Okay.
from Francis if we can share the screen? I don't see Francis. Colleagues from the ministry?
So how do we do it?
Dear participants, one moment, please. Let's get the presentation on the screen.
Evelyn, I think now you can host. You can share the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Let me make an attempt and see. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Perfect, Evelyn, in presentation mode, please.
Okay. Yes, so as we were waiting for the presentation to be screened, I was mentioning that what I'm about to present is insights course, past experience we've had with working on gully rehabilitation, but also the experience and insights we have gathered while implementing the project on behalf of Ministry of Water and Environment regarding supporting communities, to restore our water resources within the Lwakhakha sub-catchment. But specifically today, because we are handling a lot of interventions under that project, today for the benefit of this webinar, we will be looking at thinking with the landscape, hills, gullies, quicker, a case of the Lwakhakha sub-catchment, which is located in Choga Water Management Zone. Once again, Evelyn Businja is my name, and I work for Environment. So we will have a brief presentation, and that is the content. We'll give a little bit of background, which I already presented, probably will run through quickly. Looking at the project location, the context. We're also going to look at what the problem was, what did we do, the approach, the methodology, and then what were the results like, but also give some conclusion and recommendations. And I gave a summary of the project. That's the project that is still being implemented. It will be closing this year by close of November. Who are the main implementers, being supervised by International Union for Conservation of Nature, and implementing on behalf of Ministry of Water and Environment with funds from World Bank. And just to give a pictorial view of what I had already presented, that is the project location. Sorry, something I want to first. Yeah, the project location. So the project, I mentioned that Lwakhakha is a transboundary, a sub-catchment shared between Uganda and Kenya. And for the benefit of this webinar, I wanted to mention that much as it covers over 5 districts, the work was concentrated in those 3 districts, Namisindwa, Manafwa, and Tororo. And the key issues that were really being addressed under this project, mainly soil erosion, land degradation, issues of deforestation, riverbank degradation, limited access to clean water, and also limited alternative livelihoods. But those bolded in red, the soil erosion and land degradation, is what we shall focus on during this webinar. So what was the problem? One of the biggest problem within the Lwakhakha sub-catchment from an assessment conducted by Ministry of Water and Environment in 2018, and of course participatory with all the stakeholders, was that gully formations is one of the biggest threats really affecting water resources. And so that was the biggest problem. And I would really want to share with you how we've really come in and how we've been handling this together with the communities and all the other stakeholders. So I'll begin with, defining gulleys. I know most of us are well informed in this topic, but allow me to mention that when we're talking of a gully, we are looking at a channel or a miniature valley that cut due to the concentrated runoff through which water commonly flows only during and immediately after heavy rains. So let's not confuse a river for a gully, because for a river, water flows either seasonally or it flows continuously. But for a gully, it's only during and immediately after the heavy rains. Also, when we go into the classifications, of course, if I'm to really explain gulleys, it would take us more than 2 hours, but I really want to give just a gist of, for us to really, for those who might not really understand when we're referring to a gully, how it looks like. There are a number of classifications. So there's classification based on size. One would say either it's a small gully or a medium or a large gully. And here, when we talk of a small gully, we are talking of a depth that is less than 1 meter deep, and also less than 2 hectares in size. That is the drainage area for the gully. Now, when you talk of medium, we are talking of a depth of 1 to 5 meters and also drainage area of 2 to about 20 hectares. So when you talk about now the large ones, we're talking of a depth of more than 5 meters and also drainage area of more than 20 hectares. And if I may just emphasize that within the sub-catchment we are referring to, over 90% of the gulleys were ranging between medium and large. A few that are still forming are those that we can categorize as small. Then there's classification based on shape. The V-shaped, the U-shaped, and trapezoidal. So the U-shaped here, reason why it takes that shape is because both the topsoil and the subsoil have the same resistance against erosion. So when water comes when it carries off the soil, it erodes uniformly. But then when it comes to the V-shaped, here the subsoil has more resistance than the topsoil. So, and we see that this is one of the most common form of gulleys, and especially in really very steep areas. Then the trapezoidal shape is when the gully bottom is made of more resistant materials than the topsoil, and this actually restricts further erosion. And these are common in areas where you find the gully, water has actually exposed like a basement rock. So within the gully, you can actually see the rock. So meaning it cannot erode beyond that extent. And usually, so it keeps eroding sideways. So the gully keeps enlarging, but it does not deepen and takes that kind of shape. So when we go back to our issue we're talking of, I already mentioned that gully erosion is one of the most environmental challenges within the Elgon and specifically in the Lwakhakha sub-catchment. But also to also inform you that gully erosion is one of the most intense and difficult land degradation to really control. And there are a number of elements that contribute to this, either steep slopes, when there is limited vegetation cover, intense rainfall within the area, then combined with poor agricultural practices, and in areas where there are almost no or minimal soil and water conservation measures. And if you look at the picture on the right of the presentation, you see that is typical of the sub-catchment I'm talking about. If I can activate my pointer, this that you see is a gully that has formed. But on either side of the gully, you see that is someone's garden, people's gardens, with almost no soil and water conservation structure. So when it rains, it simply sweeps all the soil and it runs off with the water. And it makes it a little bit easy for this running water to really erode the sides of these gardens. So hence really becoming easy to form these gulleys. But also within the sub-catchment, we see Bududa, Manafwa, and the Namisindwa districts really most affected by this. So also in addition, we see that if this problem is not addressed, the gulleys continue to widen, to deepen, becoming really a threat to communities, a threat to, the environment, destroying houses, killing animals, because most of these gulleys are really deep. I want to give a case of the Bumoni gully. So that picture on my right, it is the aerial photograph of that gully, and you see it is very deep, and here already widening. So within the gully now, this is the trapezoidal shape I was talking about, because it has already even exposed rocks beneath, and also eating up in the sides. you can see that it has actually cut off accessibility between these two villages. And here is, I don't know if you're able to see my cursor.
Yes, Evelyn, please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, here is the bridge that has been constructed by the community just to ease accessibility. But just imagine if this is not solved, this gully will deepen and probably this bridge will be no more and these villages will be separate. But also on the left side of the gully is a source where these two villages actually fetch water. This source serves over 3-4 villages within this area, but it's also being threatened by this very gully. So the more water it contains, the more it deepens and becomes a threat. So on the left side is a graphical presentation of what has been happening with this gully. In 2018 is when IUCN was assessing this area on behalf of ministry. And by then, the measurements taken were mainly the length. But 2019, ministry came in again to take still measurements on the same gully. And here they took a number of aspects: length, average width, average depth, widest section, and deepest section. 2022 is when now Aid Environment came in as part of this assignment, did measurements as guided by ministry, and this is a representation of what is happening. All aspects are actually increasing. And I think you see the color, I think this must be probably yellow, the widest section in meters, this has actually increased much more than the depth and all the other aspects. And in 2022, already wide. So this was one of the gullies we really saw needs to be prioritized for restoration. And this is what's happening with almost all the gullies we are working with. And the reason why surely we need to give special interest in, handling gullies. So what was done? So our first step when we came in, of course, was to, map all these hotspots, where the gullies are, where they have formed within the sub-catchment. Took time to measure each system, looking at the length, the width, the depth, prioritize those that we ranked as severe together with the communities. And then went ahead, delineated these gullies and called the areas that catch water for these gullies as microcatchments. Reason we did this is the setup of the project also required us to also restore degraded areas using soil and water conservation measures. But then we realized that spreading wide would not really benefit. And also because of the concept of thinking with the landscape, if you're to handle a gully, you will not bring in your engineering structures right away without handling the area that is feeding water for this gully. Because at the end of the day, you'll put in all the gully plugs and whatever structures you put in, well done and well thought through, but this water will sweep them off. Because these are gullies that are even deeper than, more than even 5-6 meters and wider than even 20 meters. So you wouldn't want to risk your money and put in structures and the next minute they are swept by water. So we ended up, mapping all these gullies and delineating areas that are contributing water hydrologically to these, for these gullies. And the reason was this would be the entry point for us to now focus interventions upstream of the gully, catch this water so that it is retained within the system, reduce the flow of the water, such that these gullies will no longer be receiving even a lot of water. And that starts now the healing process. But also the time we come in to do the structural interventions, it helped because already there was not a lot of pressure that would really damage the structures established, but also this also helped the structures to function effectively and efficiently. So here you can see the photos, the team really taking measurements, but also the ones below are now the gulleys and marked microcatchments, area that feed water to these gulleys. So the next step, of course, was to engage these community members, because this is land that belongs to the communities. So they had to sign forms, agreeing that they have understood the benefit of putting these soil and water conservation structures on their land, and they were really willing. So after signing all the consent forms as required by World Bank, then we ended up engaging communities now to also take lead in even providing the labor to establish these structures. We also trained the trainers, a team of youth and some elderly people who are very interested and still energetic to establish these structures, to actually train more landowners. And a number of structures were done. From the photography, you can see the stone bands on the left, along the hill slopes of Manafwa in Bunyinza Town Council. You can see the trenches that were done in this photograph. And this actually illustrates now the micro-catchment areas for the gulleys earmarked and where they were concentrated. Because hydrologically, there's no need of covering the entire micro-catchment, but you look at areas that really influence greatly contributing water to these gulleys. And once you solve those spots, then you're good to go now to go to the next step of installing the other infrastructures. Also, in addition, we were using structures like percolation pits. Here, you divert water from probably a walkway into a pit, giving this water enough time to sink in the ground, rather than running and causing havoc. And these were done within the microcatchments for these gulleys, just to ensure that tap all the water that is flowing and reduce the water that is going into the gulleys. We also did the trenches. Here is a closer view of the trench that were also stabilized with the grasses, the napier grasses, that also have other functions, providing feed to the animals. We also did tree planting within the same microcatchments, upstream of the microcatchments on the top. We did a lot of tree planting together with the communities. And that gave us a starting point to do the biophysical structures. So by the time we established the biophysical structures, we had already mapped and also identified where these structures can actually perform effectively, because they're quite expensive. So they need to be planned well on where they can be located to function effectively. So as you see from this picture up topmost, it shows locations identified to install the gully plugs. And I must say, even by the time we went in to do the gully plugs, the water had really reduced. So we did designs to support the BOQs and how much materials we need to secure for specific structures. And on this structure already, you can see that the vegetation, much of the vegetation had already even been covered. So we are installing just to ensure that this other flow that might come in also is trapped, and the soils are trapped, to ensure that this gully heals faster as we would want it. We are still, showing a number of biophysical structures. And here, the masons are actually in action. We're also looking at other structures using gunny bags filled with soil to stabilize the established structures, and also using vegetative measures like the vetiver grass. Because vetiver grass, from its characteristics, it's a grass that is resilient, resistant to droughts, but also once it establishes, its rooting system is very good. It goes over 1 meter down and has a fibrous kind of rooting system that stabilizes the soils. So this also helps to strengthen the functionality of the biophysical structures installed within these gulleys. So what were the outcomes? One, by observation, there's a lot of silt that has been trapped by these gulleys, and the gulleys are actually recovering. Vegetation is regenerating, but also from testimonies of communities within these areas, especially Manafwa and Namisindwa, they're already mentioning that has been tremendous reduction in sand mining because now this silt would be transported downstream and mined downstream. But now it's no longer happening. First, it's a disadvantage for livelihood, but then would also want to also get a concern of where all this soil was coming from people's gardens. So we believe that once this soil is retained within our gardens, the farmers will now produce crops and be happy, as opposed to what was happening when the soils were all being taken. There's also soil profile improvements on most of the hills in Manafwa now. The farmers who participated in establishing this structure that I already showed you, they are already even growing bananas. Some of the farmers growing beans, and they are really happy with the outcome of all these interventions. So what are some of the conclusions? We do appreciate that the rate of gully erosion really primarily depends on the runoff. And this mirrors the characteristics of the landscape, or what we call micro-catchment, or what we can call the watershed of these gulleys, or the catchment areas of these gulleys. And some of the characteristics, they include soil health, slope gradient, vegetative cover, and existing water retention structures. So it means for whichever gully, the extent of that gully depends on the health of the catchment that is catching water for that gully. So if the soils are weak, if the slope is high, if the vegetation cover is not there, if there are no structures, definitely those gullies will be deeper and probably wider. And then if the catchment is healthy, then it probably a little bit fairly healthy, then you will see gullies, but a size that is not very threatening. So, and that is why we say thinking with the landscape actually heals gullies faster. Because the moment you put into aspects of the landscape, then you're able to handle the gully really well, as already presented. And generally, gullies are formed by an increase in surface runoff. So if the more the runoff, the more you will have this soil taken off by the runoff. And therefore, if we are to minimize the formations of these gullies, we have to solve the problem of the runoff. And where is this water coming from? From the catchment that we are talking about, the landscape we are talking about, the watershed we are talking about. And then establishment of these soil and water conservation structures within the gully microcatchment reduces the overflow of this water, and therefore it helps to make the biophysical structures more effective. And don't be surprised when you see some areas where engineers have come in and they established these structures really strong and good, looking really good, but within once off probably rains that are high, these structures are swept off. Don't be shocked, don't be surprised. It's because the element of the landscape was not put into consideration. They only looked at the problem, the gully, and wanted to solve it. But you can't solve it without having to understand the area that is contributing water to that structure. Once you appreciate it, then we shall have sustained structures. We shall minimize losses of resources that we invest in to establish these structures. So what are the recommendations? When we're handling gullies or controlling gullies, there are a number of approaches, but we would want to advise that these approaches have to be used as a package, not one or two, but rather have all the three. One of them is, one, to improve the catchments, reduce or regulate the runoff, that is coming from the catchment. At some extent, you need to divert this water. I showed you pictures of percolation pits. That is one of the elements of how you can divert of water, like especially the walkways. Walkways, they facilitate high-speed runoff. So when you have the walkways in such kind of microcatchments, it's better you create things like diversion channels that take the water either to a trench or to a percolation pit. So it reduces the runoff. And then finally, when you treated now the microcatchment, then you go ahead and install the structures within the gully itself. And like we mentioned, there are biophysical structures, but also vegetative structures or measures like what we saw, like the vetiver grasses, that the garnet bugs also, which are part of the structures, just to ensure that you have a mix of approaches that are really going to make this gully recover as fast as possible. Yeah, so yeah, this is what I had to share with you. Thank you for listening. We welcome questions or maybe clarity, or if there are any compliments.
Thank you so very much, Evelyn. This was an elaborate, wonderful presentation. I see comments coming in. Please, dear participants, write your questions or comments in the chat box. We already have a couple of them, which we will respond to shortly. I did not mention at the start, our intention is to have this session only go until midday. So that leaves us roughly 15 minutes. We could borrow a bit more if we need to, but please have your questions come in. We have a question coming from David Ongom. Was the establishment of biophysical structures aligned to the dry season, or was it all done during the wet and dry season? That's one comment. We have another one coming from Paulo Kagoda. When you state that that the watersheds were delineated using GIS, he assumes that a DEM was involved. The question is, can you advise on the resolution of the dam? Because majority of the freely available dams are really at coarse resolutions. And yeah, one is lucky to find a dam that is lower than 30-meter resolution. He appreciates the presentation. So Evelyn, you will take some questions, and colleagues on the project team will take other questions as well. Those are 2 questions so far. The third is from Deogracius Tumuhaise. He's asking, did you consider supporting biodiversity connectivity, pollination services, etc., while designing biophysical structures? Another question, Evelyn and colleagues, I suggest you take those first 3 as we receive others that are coming in.
Okay, thank you, James, and thank you, colleagues online for the wonderful questions. On the team, we had a GIS specialist, and just in case he's online, he will come in to respond. But I will make the first attempt. So the question on the biophysical structures, whether they were aligned to the dry season or the wet season, I must say that the planning was done to ensure that the software related activities go on during the rainy seasons as we plan for the biophysical structure installations in the dry season, because we know it can be messy during the rainy seasons. But then the experience we had actually was interesting because of having identified these microcatchments for these gulleys, and agreeing that we should use these microcatchments as demo sites for soil and water conservation to fast track the runoff. Interestingly, even during the wet season, there was not much water flowing. That's the interesting bit, because we started with the soil and water conservation upstream of these gulleys. So after installing most of these interventions that I've already showcased, there was not much water really flowing. And if you look keenly to the photos that I shared, there was already vegetation growing within. So meaning that the erosive capacity of these waters was no longer a concern for us. But yes, we aligned to the dry season, and most of the works were ongoing during the dry season. Yeah, if I hope that really answers your question.
Yeah,
Then
I think, yeah,
probably,
thank you, Evelyn. One remark, ladies and gentlemen, please have the comments come in. Those that we may not respond to exhaustively, for instance, if they need us to share detailed information or data, we will, after this presentation, prepare responses that can be shared to all participants. But Evelyn, please go ahead.
yeah, sure. I think in terms of delineations, we tried as much as possible to use high resolution digital elevation models. And our GIS specialist, I'm not sure if Joshua is online, he will respond to that. I will go ahead and respond to the third question that was raised by Tumhaise on whether there was, concern, biodiversity connectivity while designing these structures and also installing them. Indeed, there were a number of considerations. One, of course, as the gulleys develop, the ecosystem changes a little bit. So spots where there was no flowing water before starts flowing, and probably there's vegetation already growing, and there are a lot of microfaunas within the areas. But remember, initially, these areas were not meant to actually have water flow through them. And that is where the problem is, the gulleys. So here, when we are really sorting the problem of the gulleys, we also put into consideration that in as much as we'd want to stop the flow of water and allow the area to heal as it was before, for the interest of the landowners, but also for the interest of the downstream ecosystems, the structures are designed in a way that they allow ground percolation, they allow water percolation through these stones and the other structures, but also they allow soils to be trapped and to start, the regeneration of vegetation. So all those aspects are put into consideration. But one thing I must confess is we did not do some form of action research to say at the time of installation, what is the existing biodiversity? That we did not do it. And probably it could be an interesting area of study, maybe for the consequent projects. Yeah, but we consciously, design these structures in a way that they allow water to flow within the system, either down percolation or percolation in the sides, or through the structure itself. And that helps, biodiversity within the system to all survive and coexist. So I'll allow, if my colleague Joshua is online, or maybe James, to respond to the question on the resolution and what digital elevation model we used, if it's possible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Evelyn, and thank you, participants, for the questions. Joshua will respond to the question about the digital elevation model. I'd like to read a couple of questions, additional ones, and as I mentioned, those that we may not answer exhaustively now, responses will be provided. Another question from Asimwe Verana is asking whether we have incorporated any specific strategies that would ensure the sustainability and success of the interventions, that is, considering the rising number of incidents of extreme weather. The compliments about the presentation and a question, are the bugs used environmentally friendly? complements. And another question, what is now being done within the wider watershed to completely minimize the problem? So if you could respond. Another question related to what you just answered, Evelyn, this is answered, do the biophysical structures favor the biodiversity? And I think Evelyn has answered that question sufficiently. So thank you very much, colleagues, for those questions. Evelyn, if you could respond to those, and I will invite Joshua to respond to the question about the digital elevation model.
Okay. Thank you, James, and thank you, listeners. Is it okay if Joshua responds, if he's online?
Please respond to the questions that you can while I find Joshua.
Okay. So the question from Asimwe, mentioning, have we incorporated strategies to sustain success of these interventions? Yes. I did not go into the nitty-gritties because I really wanted to use as limited time as possible. But at the start of establishing these structures, I mentioned that we had to mobilize, identify all the landowners where the gulleys are, along the gulleys, have sessions of raising awareness and rebuilding capacity, but also training those that will participate. And as I speak, these micro-catchments, what we call watersheds for the gulleys, they have micro-catchment management committees. And the composition of these committees is aligned to the government structure, the local structures, LC1s, LC2s, even LC3, but also even the representation from the districts. And so even councillors, so such that when the project closes, these are the structures that are already existing, the LC1s and all the other leaders, they continue the process of mobilizing and continuing engaging communities. So I should say that that was one of the strategy to form committees that take lead in installing these infrastructures, but also mobilizing communities and also engaging in the actual work. And I'm confident because one, looking at the testimonies from the landowners, they've seen a huge change on the soil profiles, on the productivity, because now it's 2 years almost, but also they've seen a lot of reduction in the erosivity of these waters. The gulleys are healing. So there's that already natural push that they would want to do much more work. Even those who had not actually installed these interventions, in the long run, they ended up also copying these approaches on their gardens. So that was one of the strategies to ensure that we have structure that will continue work even post the project life. Then there was a question on whether the banks used are environmentally friendly. Yes, they are. If you look at how these structures are installed, they are plugged in within the land, but on the surface, we have a number of gunny bags. These gunny bags, they are, after a certain period, they rot. But their work is one, to stabilize the soils and then allow the vegetative measures like the vetiver grasses to establish. So even when they rot, the grasses will already have established and that soil profile is safe enough. So they are actually environmental friendly. We did not use any polythene or substances that really are not environmental friendly. And if you look at even the way the soils, the stones are piled together, they allow percolation, like I mentioned, and so they are not able to, disturb the flow of water within the system. So all that makes it environmentally friendly. So what is being done in the wider watershed to minimize the gulleys? So we because of the resources, of course, at our exposure, there were areas marked out for implementation and in a number of interventions. Riverbank, demarcation and restoration. We did a lot of tree planting, soil and water conservation. And so because of the demonstrated impact of the interventions on minimizing the gulleys. Already we believe that the lessons will be taken on by the districts, by the ministries to upscale. But where we have considered this work already, we see a lot of impact already, that there are no more gulleys really forming, and those that have already formed are actually recovering. But that is, of course, on a limited scope. And so we are hoping that from the good lessons and the impact created, we believe that now when it comes to scale out, we have a basis to really demonstrate impact.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. There is one or two other comments that has come in. Several of them are compliments. There are questions on whether we will share the slides. Yes, the slides will be shared by the ministry. The ministry team will share the slides using the usual platform of inviting participants for this webinar and others. The question about the digital elevation model, please allow us to respond to that in writing, as I mentioned, as well as the other questions that we may not have answered exhaustively. So ladies and gentlemen on the call, I'd like to thank you so very much for your participation. I would like to return to the ministry colleagues, the ministry team, to say, to give any remarks, be they concluding remarks or explanatory remarks to explain the work that we have implemented together with the ministry. I must stress that this work has been implemented with the active participation of the team at the ministry, at the Choga Water Management Zone, and also colleagues from the center, as well as the district, local governments, and the communities, and as well as our supervisor, IUCN. So on their behalf, this presentation is made. Colleagues from the ministry, Dr. Callist, if you could give the remarks, whether to explain or to conclude the session, please. Colleagues from the ministry. Madam Gwendo, yes, yes, engineer.
Oh, okay, fine. I think
Engineer Maximo, you are muted.
I can see Madam Gwendolyn is back, so maybe she has something to say. Okay, yeah. Maybe, I don't know whether she's still there, but I also don't see Dr. Callist, so let me chip in. On behalf of the Ministry of Water and Environment, we want, first of all, to introduce myself. I'm Engineer Maximo Twinomuhanji, and I'm the team leader Choga Water Management Zone in the Ministry of Water and Environment, based in Mbare, and I've been part of the process that has been working with aid environment to implement this work. So I want to thank you, James, and Evelyn, and the entire aid environment team, together working with IUCN for the successful implementation of these very key interventions, the restoration of the deep gulleys in Lwakhakha, and for putting up this excellent presentation that has really brought out the concept of thinking with the watershed, the landscape, in trying to restore these gulleys. It's quite interesting, it's informative, good experience sharing, And I think the people in this webinar have enjoyed. I've enjoyed myself, how you brought it out. When I first heard about the issue of thinking with the watershed, I was wondering where the watershed thinks, but the way you crafted your message is really very clear, and it brings out the concept of really working around the watershed to ensure that you reduce the speed of runoff that goes to the gulley with a lot of energy and speed, and that way it has a lot of eroding power. So when you work around the watershed and you harvest water in the watershed, reduce its rate of runoff to the gulley, then the interventions you are putting down in the gulley can actually make sense. So the concept of thinking with the watershed, to me, has really been well crafted, brought out very well, and presented very well. And for this, we congratulate you. And I think the questions from the chat have been very interesting. These are questions really which give us the task to think deeper. What does this mean? How do we take this forward? How do we roll it out? We have a number of other interventions as the Ministry of Water and Environment, Choga Water Management Zone. We have other projects that will take this to bigger scales, but also we usually want to advise our stakeholders to uphold the spirit of sustainability, that what we put in place, like the biophysical structures, can they be maintained? The trees that we've planted, can they be grown? Because if these important interventions are sustained, then the gulleys that we've rehabilitated can continue functioning so well. So before we think about rolling out to bigger scales, the sustainability of what we always put on ground also becomes very important. Then we also have other opportunities for research. Can we try to quantify the contribution of these key interventions to what we are trying to solve? So I saw questions about the DEM issues to do with how this can really reduce the soil erosion. I saw someone talking about soil types and how they contribute to the problem. So can we think deeper? Can we get interested in this and try to take this forward, building on what Evelyn and Aid Environment have presented, to continue informing our stakeholders on natural resources management. So, ladies and gentlemen, our time is fast spent. I want to again thank James, Evelyn, and the entire Aid Environment team. I want to thank the Water Resources Institute for always organizing these webinars, and thank our director, Dr. Callist, for again this framework that we are operating in. So from the Ministry of Water and Environment, I really want to end it here, and I want to wish all of you a nice weekend. I thank you.
Thank you, Engineer.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
And, a
Bye.
nice weekend, everyone.